to do that. So let's get started here. Firstly, I'm just going to grab this photo, and I'm just going to take it into the edit module here. And now we're inside of the edit module. And a lot of people ask me, how do you create a mask, or where do you go to add a mask inside ON1 Photo RAW? And it's not really that simple, but it is really simple. So you can't really add a mask by just clicking on a button inside Photo RAW. There's no just kind of add a mask button. First, you have to create a mask by either masking in with a brush or using a color range mask or a luminosity mask. So let's get started on the very basic mask there is, and which is just using your masking brush. So all I'm going to do is, let's say we want to replace this sky area up here. So what we're going to do is we're going to want to bring in a new sky layer. But first, we have to brush out this actual sky. So what I'm going to do is, to create a mask inside ON1 Photo RAW, I'm going to head over to my tool area over here, and I'm going to grab my masking tools, it lives inside this mask area. And once you click on it, up top here, you have all of your masking tools for either your layer or your effects with your filters. Now, there's two different brushes inside Photo RAW, and there's your masking brush, and then there's your local adjustment brush. Now, they do the exact same thing, but one is for filters and your layers, and one is for your local adjustments. So since we're actually brushing on a layer here, and we're wanting to remove, the sky area up top here, we're going to want to use our masking brush. So up top here, I have my masking brush selected, which is this far left one with the little paintbrush here. And you'll have your mode here, so you can choose to either paint out or paint in. Since we're trying to remove part of our photo, we're going to want it to be selected paint out. Next, we have our size here. Now, if you want to change the size of your brush, you can either use the bracket keys on your keyboard. Left bracket will make it smaller. Right bracket will make it bigger. Or you can just head up and you can scroll with this. Same with paint in or paint out. To switch from paint in and paint out, rather than having to go up to this menu each time, you can just simply hold down Shift and then hit X on your keyboard. So Shift and then X. Notice how that changes the middle from a minus to a plus. And then you have your feathering. So this is just going to determine how soft or how hard you want that edge on your brush. Next, we have opacity, which is basically determining how dark or how light you want to brush in or brush out. So now we want to go in and let's just create a basic mask. So I'm going to go in and let's say we want to brush out part of the sky area. Well, I can do that by just holding down, or not even holding down. I have my masking brush selected. So now I can just brush on, and you'll see how it removes that sky area from my entire photo. So now if we go over to that layer over here, and we click in this little area right here, right next to the layer photo, this is going to show us our masking options. So this is going to show us where we've created a mask on our photo with this little block right here. And this little block is going to show us either an all white or an all black, or you're going to have some white and some black. This is just showing you your mask and where you've painted in and painted out. So if we view this, this is the area that we painted out from the top of our photo. And you'll notice it's completely black because our opacity was at 100%. If it was at something like, if it was at something like 50% and we painted this on, that's going to only paint out 50% of that mask, hence the gray and not the complete black. So let's reset this real quick. And we'll view this photo. And that's at its basic, the fastest way to create a mask in ON1 Photo RAW. So let's go ahead and let's add a new sky layer here. Just going into my ON1 extras, my backgrounds. And let's grab this photo. Okay, so now what I want to do, and this is just to set up the sky replacement, and we're going to get into more advanced masking, but let me just put this sky layer here so you guys can see the masking a little bit better. So what I do whenever I'm replacing a sky is I'll pull down on the opacity for that layer, And then I'll kind of adjust the size. And then I can move it and position it to where I want it to be. Boom. That looks pretty good right about there. So now I'll go up and I'll pull up on the opacity to 100. And now I'll just drop that sky layer right below my base layer here. Boom. Okay. So now let's say we want to mask out this sky area. But if we use our masking brush and we kind of go in here and we try to mask out this sky area, oops, and we get to these trees down here, you'll see that it's going to be hard for us, even with a small brush size, to make an exact edge over here, even with a hard brush. So if we have our feathering at 0, and we go in here, it's still going to be pretty difficult to make that edge nice and sharp. So we're going to want to use some sort of tonality detecting masking technique to brush out this white area and leave these trees nice and refined. So let's go and we'll reset this mask. And there's a couple different ways you can do that. The first way I'm going to show you how to do it is with your perfect brush. And your perfect brush lives up here in your toolbar area right here. So we're just going to turn on this perfect brush here. I'm going to go up and turn my feathering to 100%. And your perfect brush is basically going to detect tonalities in your photo and separate between your foreground and your background. So in here in this little gear section, this is going to determine how your perfect brush works. And it's automatically going to be at 10 and 10, which is a pretty good transition from your different tonalities in your photo. You can also move this up if you want to take out larger chunks of tonality, or you can move it down if you want to take out less. I'm just going to leave it at 10 and 10. And I'm going to increase my brush size quite a bit. And now that I have this perfect brush selected, watch as I paint over this sky area. And it's not brushing out any of this area on this building here. That's because it's detecting the tonalities that are different, this sort of white sky with this brown building, and it's not allowing me to paint out any of that foreground. And it kind of takes a second if you have, differences in tonality in your sky. A good way to do it is to go into your masking options here and click View. Now you can turn off your perfect brush. You can kind of get it, the general gist of what you want painted out. And then you can go back in, grab your perfect brush, and now you can kind of paint out these areas a little bit better. There we go. Kind of moving right along. Oops. That's the downside of replacing skies, is it kind of takes a minute. Okay. So now let's go over here, see how we're doing on this side. But you'll notice that's doing a pretty good job of kind of, separating their foreground and our background sky layer. Let's turn off this perfect brush and then just clean up these tiny areas in here that we didn't get. Okay, so now let's view this mask real quick. And what I'm going to want to do is, obviously there's a ton in there that we need to refine. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to refine this mask. And by refining the mask, you have a few different ways that you can refine a mask inside Photo RAW. And before I get to refining, let me check on questions because I see that there's 2 up here. So, okay, so Judy Hancock asks, how do you fix the halo at the top of the building? So we're going to get into that right now with the refining. So let's go in here and let's grab our refine tools. So your refine tools live over in your toolbar area over here in this refine section. Now there's 3 tools up here. There's your refine brush, your chisel mask tool, and then your blur mask tool. Now more often than not, you're going to be using your refine brush and your chisel mask tool. So let's grab our refine brush here. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that my refine brush is set to paint out. And what your refine brush does is it detects tonalities also, and it separates those white tonalities from these darker tonalities in my mask, and it kind of cleans up those white areas a little bit. So watch as I brush this on. And there we go. It's kind of cleaned up those areas around our trees and softened them up so that there's not so much white haloing around them. Another thing you could do is if we hit Control Z, is you can go in here and like Judy was saying, you can use your chisel mask tool. So we'll go into refine, we'll grab our chisel mask tool, and the chisel mask is basically going to chisel away the edge of your mask. So it's not going to chisel away at the inside of it, it's just going to chisel away at this kind of haloing around the edge of it. So now if we turn this up a little bit, we'll turn it up to maybe 10. We can brush this on and you'll see it brushes out that white around the edge of our mask. And this is great for buildings, especially. So if you wanted to remove this halo from this building, you could just brush this on and you'll see it removes that nice white, just sort of edge from the building. And we can kind of continue on over here. Just like that. So now let's zoom out. And what we're going to want to do now is obviously there's some stuff we need to clean up. So let's go ahead and let's click this skies layer. And we're going to go into effects. And I'm just going to kind of make it the same tonality as my bottom area. So I'm going to add a filter. Let's add curves. And I'm just going to grab my mid-tone point in here. And I'm going to pull it up quite a bit. Maybe about right there. Okay. So now let's go in back to that other layer. Now we can grab our refine brush again. And let's chisel away. Oops, not want to chisel. Grab our refine brush. And now let's brush away to remove some of that edge. There we go. Kind of soften that up a little bit over there. And we can do the same thing over here. There we go. Kind of soften that up also. So now we can go in. And if we want to soften this area up a little bit more, there's a tool that you can use to do that. And that's called your blur mask tool. So now let's go in and let's grab our refine tools here. And we'll grab our blur mask tool. And this is great for blurring the edges of your mask. So, okay, it looks like I have a few questions here. So let me check on the questions a little bit. Okay, so no questions pertaining to this. Okay, so now let's go over here. And if you want to blur the area for the trees, what you could do is just grab this tool. Oh, let's turn up the amount quite a bit. And use this to blur out a section a little bit. And that's just great for if you have areas kind of on the side where people probably wouldn't notice those are over there. You could use this tool to kind of blur that out. Now we can go back over here. We can clean up this area a little bit. by using our refine brush. We can go into chisel. Oops, too much. There we go. Okay, so those are kind of just the basic ways that you can refine around these trees a little bit. But there's a quicker way to get a mask if you have a large tonality area like we did earlier. So if we zoom out and we go in, and that's to how to, so that was how to use your perfect brush to kind of go in and remove large areas of tonality. But a quick way to do it, if you have a large area that's, you know, the same color, let's go in here and let's reset this mask. Come on. So we'll reset this mask. And you'll notice this area in here is basically all the same color. It's just that kind of white blown out area. So what we can do is there's a mask called a color range mask. And that's basically using a color to detect areas in your photo. And then it's going to choose those colors and then mask that area out automatically. So what we're going to do is just grab this color range mask here. We're going to use this dropper tool. And we're going to drop it on this area right in here. Now we're going to go over and we're going to invert the mask. So now you'll see that it did a pretty good job of refining these trees already. And what we can do is we can go in and we can choose a color range or use our color range slider here, and we can modify how much it removes or keeps from our photo. So let's zoom into this tree here. And maybe about right there. Okay, so let's zoom out real quick. What we're going to want to do is we're going to want to blur this tree area a little bit because it's a little bit harsh on the edges. So we're going to grab our blur mask tool like we were doing earlier in our refine tools here. Now let's go over to our blur mask tool here. And let's go in and let's just blur this out a little bit. Oops. Okay, so now let's zoom out. And now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to brush in this area that we masked out by using that color range mask. So we're going to grab our masking brush, and we're going to do that by hitting B on our keyboard. Now I'm going to hold down Shift and hit X to change it to paint in. Now I'll increase my brush size with the bracket keys on my keyboard. And now we can just paint in this area on the bottom. And then I got some areas over here, so we'll just brush those in. Okay, so now let's grab our chisel tool because I see a few little areas up here that could use just a little bit of chiseling. So we're going to go over to our refine tools again. Head up and grab our chisel tool. I'm going to lower the amount to about 5, 6. Now I'll just go in and kind of brush. Oops, let's see if I can zoom in. Okay, so it was being applied. Sometimes inside Photo RAW, when you're applying a brush with a refine, if you're refining a area on your photo and you're not zoomed in, you'll see that there's a little bit of haloing right here. But then if I zoom in, it's not as bad. So just keep in mind that zoom in on your mask areas just to make sure if they're refined or not. Because if you zoom in you'll see that that area is refined, but the pixels are kind of showing me that it's a little bit haloed. So that looks pretty good as far as this mask area up here, because if I zoom in, it's a lot more kind of refined. We could probably hit it one more time with the refine brush. There we go. We'll just leave it like that. That looks pretty good. And so what we're going to do now is we want to deal with this sky area up here because it's a lot less, it's a lot more detailed than this tree area. The trees are kind of a little bit blurred because I shot this with about 3.2, so they're a little bit out of focus there. So we're going to want to do the same to our sky layer. So we're going to go in and let's actually, oh, wait, I have an area over here that I need to clean up a little bit. Okay, so let's grab our perfect brush for this area. We'll grab our masking brush. We'll go up and set it to paint out. There we go. And I can kind of just brush those little gray areas out of here. Boom. So now we zoom out here. And so we have this sky layer right below our base layer. So we're going to want to have that selected here. And we're going to go and we're going to add a filter. And we're just going to add a lens blur filter. And we're going to want to bring this up to about, or bring this down to about, I don't know, 30%. And let's choose this preset style and let's use bokeh medium. And sorry, go back and change that to about 30%. Okay, so now if I turn this off and on, there we go. Looks a lot better, kind of blending in with these areas that are a little bit more blurry for our foreground. Okay, so now that we have this photo, just the sky top area replaced, we're gonna obviously wanna bring this down and make a reflection to make it look realistic. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna actually duplicate this sky layer here. We're gonna right click it and select duplicate layer. And I'm actually gonna turn off all of the effects for it. So I'm just gonna reset its effects filters. Now I'm gonna drag this sky layer that we duplicated above our base layer. And I'm gonna double click on it. And I'm gonna rename bottom sky. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hit V on my keyboard. That's going to grab my move tool. I'm gonna head up to my top bar and I'm gonna choose flip vertically. So now my sky layer is flipped vertically. I'm gonna lower the opacity. And now I can drag this down just like we did the top layer and kind of position it to where we want it. Probably about right there, looks good. So now let's make this about, I don't know, 56 or so. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna use a blending mode here. And your blending modes for your layers live in this little gear section here. And I'm just gonna choose hard light. Boom. And obviously there's an area that we need to, paint out. So we're gonna grab our masking brush by hitting B on our keyboard. We're gonna make sure our perfect brush is set to off. We're gonna increase the brush size, bracket keys on our keyboard. And then let's just brush this out. Oops. Yep, brush this out from this area that we don't want it to be. Keep painting this out. I notice I missed this area on the bottom here. Okay, and one thing we need to fix is you'll notice that with this top area right here, the sky part kind of shines through this little area in the building, and it doesn't really do that on the bottom in this reflection. So what we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to I'll just brush this out real quick. We're going to actually have to duplicate this bottom layer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to reset this mask here. And I'm going to duplicate this layer. And now I'm going to hit V on my keyboard and I'm going to drag that layer down so that that same sky area kind of aligns with this sky area here. And then I'll do the same thing I did before. Oops. Whoops, I duplicated it too soon, or reset the layer too soon. Sorry, guys. So we'll duplicate that layer without resetting the mask. We'll rename this light for building. And now we'll reset this mask. And we'll hit V and we'll drag this down. Align this with the light. Now we'll hit B on our keyboard. And we can brush this layer off. And I'll just use a kind of a lower opacity brush. And I'll just kind of brush some of this away. Okay, so it looks pretty good like that. So now let's go up, and what we want to do next is we want to basically merge these together into a new photo so that we can modify the entire image and not just separate layers. Before we do that, let me just check to see if there's any questions here. So no questions so far. Okay, so Ronald asked, when would you use the auto mode with the refine brush? So the auto mode with the refine brush would be good for areas that have basically the exact opposite tonality, where ON1 Photo RAW can detect those tonalities automatically. So for example, if you had sort of a black area in here rather than green, if you could use your refine brush with auto and then you could brush it on, and Photo RAW would automatically detect which areas to mask in or mask out. So Philip. Oh, sorry, Philip. So I hope you're going to show how to use masks to select part of an image. Sorry, Philip. So I hope you're going to show how to use masks to select part of an image that can be adjusted without affecting the rest of the image. So basically we did that with the color range mask. And the reason I didn't do a luminosity mask with this photo, but we can do that with another photo later on in the video, was just because that this area, there's a lot of little pockets of light in here that would get confused in the luminosity mask. So I just used the color range mask just to kind of modify that specific white color. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to create a merged photo with these all together. So we're going to go up and let's right click and let's click new stamped layer. And it's going to duplicate all 4 of these layers, and then it's going to merge them together into one single image. And you'll notice that when I did that, it kind of cleaned up that tree area over here a little bit more. And that's like I was saying earlier, that when you zoom in on the photo, it shows you the real kind of refine area. So be careful with that. And then when you do merge it together, it's going to clean up that area right there. Oh, so good question by Dwayne was to how would you blur the water to match the sky? So what we're going to do is basically for this area, since it's on water, is I'm actually going to use a glow filter rather than a lens blur filter. So what I want to do is I'm actually going to add a filter here. And I'm going to add a glow filter. And I'm basically going to use this charge more subtle. So you'll see it has kind of a glowy, fuzzy look on the water. So I'm basically going to use my haloing, and I'm going to pull up on the haloing quite a bit. If I turn that off and on, obviously that's being applied to the entire photo when we only want it to be applied to this area. So we're going to go into our glow filter here. We're going to invert our mask. And now what we can do is we can use our masking brush, and we'll just brush this on. Oops. Turn up my opacity here. And now we can just brush this on. Oops. Okay, so now if I turn this off and on, does a good job of kind of softening up that water a little bit more and matching that kind of dramatic look in the sky. So now what I want to do is, let's say I want to go in and add some detail to my photo, but I don't want it to be applied to the entire photo. So let's go ahead and we'll just add a filter here. We'll add dynamic contrast. And now what we can do is we can use that luminosity mask. So let's say we only want the detail to be applied to this kind of dark area in the building and these darker areas in here and sort of these rocks. Well, we can go in and we'll go into our masking options for our dynamic contrast filter. And let's go into luminosity here. So now if we view this mask, oops, let's make it grayscale. You'll see it's kind of auto-detecting that this area is the dark area, and this light area up here is the lighter area. It's using a luminosity mask to detect brightness and darkness in photos and then mask sort of accordingly. So I don't really want any dynamic contrast over here though. So I can actually tighten up this by using my level slider. And I'm actually just gonna pull back on my midpoint, or pull forward on my midtones. Pull back on my highlights. There we go. Okay, and now I'm just gonna brush this off here. And now I'll just invert this mask. Now if we view it, and we turn this off and on, you'll see that the detail is only being applied to this area in here where it's dark, and it's not being applied to the entire photo. So now let's go ahead and let's actually add a new filter here. And we're just gonna add a sunshine filter. And I love the sunshine filter, especially for a photo like this, because it's actually bringing in a sunshiny look to the shot, which goes along well with the sky area here in this bottom area on our photo. So I'm just gonna add one more sunshine filter. And I'm gonna pull down on the opacity a little bit. And I'm gonna choose strong. Oops. We'll choose strong, and then I'll pull down on the opacity. Because I like strong because it gives it a little bit more saturation and a little bit more color, which I like in this green area and then the sky area. But the sky area up here looks a little kind of muffled and purpley, and there's a lot of noise in it. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna add a filter, and we're gonna add noise reduction. And we're gonna go in and we're gonna turn it on to luminance. And then we're just gonna brush this. There we go. Now we can just brush this on this area over here. And then we can just pull up on it quite a bit. We turn that off and on. Does an awesome job of kind of removing that noise from the photo. So now let's go ahead and let's add a new filter here. I'm just going to add a nice vignette. And I'll just use this big softy. We'll pull back on the opacity a little bit. And now if we turn this layer, our base layer, if we reset that base layer, and we turn these layers off and on, and we turn this layer off and on, not a lot of time, replace the sky and kind of use some different masking techniques to, go in here and refine and remove a lot of this area. Keep in mind, it was a large, this was kind of a large area of just kind of basic colors. So it did kind of help us out in the end by just using that color range mask. So let's go back and let's do one last photo here and see if I can answer any of these questions. Oops. So we have a couple questions here. When will the webinar be recorded? So it's being recorded right now, and then we'll post it to our blog and our Facebook and our website later today. And then I don't see any questions inside YouTube. So Philip asks, so darkening a messy background behind the subject. Okay, so let's go over to here. And we have this bird here. Okay, so let's crop this photo just real quick. There we go. So now let's say we want to modify, specific areas on this photo, but we don't want to modify the whole thing. So there's a few different ways we can do that. There's, you have luminosity masking, we have color range masks, and we also have our local adjustments. So let's start out just by using a simple luminosity mask. And what I want to do is I want to just maybe darken this sky area. So let's go ahead and let's add a local adjustment. And let's go into our masking options and let's choose luminosity mask. So now if I view this mask, it's showing me that these darker areas are going to be the ones that aren't getting, the majority of this local adjustment. So what I can do is I can play with these levels here. So that I kind of just target these specific areas, these lighter areas in my photo. Just like that. And the cool thing about luminosity masks is that you can actually brush out the areas that you don't want that to be applied to. So now I can go in and I can just, oops, too much. Boom. So I'll pull back on the opacity. Contrast. So now let's go in and let's say we want to modify this bird here, but we don't want to modify the entire photo. We can just add an adjustment here. And let's just go to detail, and then we'll pull up on the midtones a little bit. Just a hair. And what I like to do, especially if I have a thing like this, and sort of these are the same colors, is I'll just use a color range mask, because this color of this bird is kind of similar to the color right here, and also the colors, basically in our background. So I'll just go in and I'll go into my masking options and I'll choose color range mask. And then I can just drop this down on our bird guy here. Now, if I view my mask, I can modify the color. And we'll actually go into our masking again. And you'll notice up top here how we have that haloing around our mask already. Well, if we view that mask, it's obviously kind of giving us that like gray little halo because it's not matching the tonalities. So what we can do is we'll go back into our masking options here. And we're going to actually feather the mask. So you'll see that by feathering this mask, it's kind of removing that gray sort of border around it. And if I view this again, it's a lot cleaner. And we can even feather it maybe a little bit more. There you go. That's how to use kind of a color range mask just to target specific areas in your photo, especially if they have some similar tonal ranges as the thing they're standing on. It's a lot easier to do. So any more questions so far? Let's see about in YouTube here. So no questions so far. That was kind of the gist of the masking and brushing webinar. Are there any things you guys want to see specifically as far as masking and brushing, or let me know in the comments section on YouTube or in the Q&A, and I'll try to show you guys something. Let me show you guys a couple tips and tricks for brushing. There's actually one thing I wanted to show you guys today that many people don't know, and that if you're trying to brush on a local adjustment to a specific area, so let's just put lighten. And let's say we want to lighten this area right here. Well, we can do that by just holding down Shift, clicking, holding down Shift, clicking, and then once you click over here, it'll use a straight line from that point so that it only brushes in that area with the line. So you're not actually brushing in any of the other areas. So it's just a good way to use a straight line to brush. Advice for hair. So let's go ahead and we'll go grab a hair photo. We'll grab her. And let's use a background here. Let's use this. That looks pretty good. Okay, so now let's say we want to remove this area around her hair. So what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to use my color range mask again, and I'm going to drop it in this area right here. So I'm going to drop it, and we'll invert it. And obviously there's some stuff we need to clean up. So we'll just pull up on the color range a little bit. Oops, or down, sorry. And now we can go in and we'll just paint this area in. Actually, for this photo, let's use the masking tool here. So we're gonna use the AI Quick Mask tool for this photo. And I'm actually gonna hold down or go up to my mode, and I'm gonna choose drop. And I'm gonna paint this red on all of the areas that I want to remove for the mask. And then I'll hold down Option or Alt, and I'll just brush in the areas that I want to keep. Then we'll hit apply. Okay, so it's done a pretty good job of kind of separating those areas out. Let's go ahead and hit apply here, or done. Okay, so now we want to clean up this hair area here. So what we're going to want to do is I'm actually just going to duplicate this layer. And I'm going to reset the layer properties here. Oops. Oops. Never mind. Delete that. Okay, so now what I want to do. There we go. That's what I need to do. Okay, so I'm going to duplicate this layer, put this below my wall layer, and then I'll reset the properties. So now I can turn this wall layer off. And now I can kind of go in and I can see, you know, the hairs that I do need to go in and refine and pick back up. So we're going to go in and let's go ahead and let's fix some of these areas in here. So we're going to use our refine brush. And it's going to be set to paint in. And now let's go ahead and just kind of paint in a little bit more of her hair here. Oops, I'm on the wrong layer. Okay, so now we're on the right layer and we're going to go paint in some of her hair. There we go. And you'll see it just kind of bringing out some of those little tiny hairs the more I paint it on there. There we go. So let's see down here. I think there was some area right there. That looks better. Now we have these like kind of hairs in here, so we'll clean that up. There we go, that fixed that. Maybe a couple more swoops to the hairs up here. Okay, so now what we need to go in, we've kind of fixed these areas in here. Let's go back and check on. So we still have a few kind of areas in here we could try to clean up. Let's go ahead and go back. Let's just brush this on here. Okay, so now if we want to refine it a little bit more, we can go in and remove some of this. There's a little bit, if I zoom in here, you'll see there's a little bit kind of that pink from the background on the original photo right there. So we'll just grab our refine brush again. This time we'll set it to paint out. And now we'll just brush this on those tonal areas with the pink in it, or the orange or whatever color that is. Okay, so now that looks pretty good. There we go, that looks better. And okay, so now if we zoom out and we turn this off and on, I've done a pretty good job of kind of bringing back even those little tiny strands of hair. And you can always go in and keep, you know, brushing on there and bringing some of that more back into the photo. So I hope that helped, Janice. Appreciate the question. So Arnie asks, if I need to make an adjustment to the original layer using a mask, is it correct that I need to use a local adjustment? I need to make an adjustment. It kind of depends on what you're trying to do, Arnie. If you're just trying to make a local adjustment, if you're just trying to use sort of a local adjustment to modify, you know, specific tonalities like these, you know, your exposure, your contrast, your highlights, then I would recommend using a local adjustment. But if you're trying to make an adjustment to an original layer in terms of maybe adding an effect or something, you could always add a filter too. You wouldn't need to use a local adjustment, but you could. Okay, so any more questions, guys, before I kind of wrap up here? So Doug asks, you are using masking to target the effects. Is there a way to link the effects to a specific layer and not all of the layers like Photoshop's clipping mask? So yeah, if you wanted to modify a specific layer, all you would have to do is just click on that layer. And then you could go in and you could modify, you know, if we wanted to add an effect, if we wanted to add maybe dynamic contrast. And that kind of brings out the detail behind her, but it's not being applied to her. So if we go back to this photo, now there's no effect being applied to that photo. But if we click on this wall layer, then we have that dynamic contrast filter being applied. So you can actually modify specific layers just by clicking on that specific layer. And you can also modify the raw data in those layers. So if you do have a raw photo in here, or you're modifying, different layers with raw elements to them, you do have that raw modifying capability. All right. So I hope that answered all your questions. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope you guys learned a little bit about masking and brushing, and keep your eyes peeled for the next webinar. It's going to be next week. So hope to see you guys some of you guys there, and have a great rest of your week.